Before we begin, a heads up. This audio documentary shares personal stories and perspectives about alleged spiritual and sexual abuse. Some content is mature and may be graphic. Listener discretion is advised. If you feel overwhelmed while listening, please pause and seek support from a trusted friend or professional. Parents and guardians, please preview before sharing with minors.
After the results of the first case came in, I felt deflated and really sad. I think I had idealized this far-off place in my head, and I had idealized how they were going to respond to us. When the decision came back saying that there was a total lack of witnesses, when I was a witness, I just fell into a depression. It was like having someone you love tell you that you're not a trustworthy person. And in this case, it was the church. It was one of my greatest loves. So I just felt so destabilized in my sense of self and what I knew to be true. I lost trust in myself and in the reality that I had seen really clearly. I tried to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just couldn't imagine the level of pain that Father Dave had caused. Maybe they just didn't realize how imperative it was to stop him because they didn't understand that pain. But a question that I asked myself was, should I say something? Since I knew that we were submitting a second case, I decided that I would wait again before speaking out and see if a decision would come back that would protect people and allow me to move on with my life.
Hi everyone, this is Sister Danielle Victoria. A few years ago, Sister Theresa Aletheia and I did something brave, or something reckless, depending on who's listening. We both left the convent and began the long process of beginning a new religious community of nuns, or more technically accurate, religious sisters. We each had entered the convent more than a decade ago, but we felt God calling us to something else, to a new mission to people on the fringes of the church, especially those wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the church. But for us, this mission wasn't abstract. It was personal. Just after we started our new community, Sister Theresa and I decided that before we began this mission, we needed to tell our own stories of abuse to protect anyone who could be harmed. In 2024, we came forward publicly to share our experiences of spiritual abuse at the hands of a trusted priest. This audio documentary delves more into our stories and the nuances and complexity of adult abuse in spiritual settings. This podcast isn't about breaking our silence. We've already shared our story publicly. It's about breaking open how spiritual abuse happens, why it so often goes unnoticed or unaddressed, and how we can begin to build communities that are more honest, more human, and more hopeful. Each of us has a role to play in this work of repair. We invite you to join us in this difficult but essential work. This audio documentary is the first major step in the mission of the Sisters of the Little Way, of beauty, truth, and goodness, a mission of listening and solidarity with people on the fringes of the church, especially those who have been wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the church. If you would like to support our mission and projects like this, please visit sistersofthelittleWay.com. In this episode, we accompany Sister Theresa Aletheia as she struggles with how the first abuse case at the Vatican was decided, leaving others vulnerable. We also journey with her to Italy, where she prepares to make a life commitment to God within the very community where the abuse happened. Welcome to Descent into Light.
After everything that happened with Father Dave, one of the things that really helped me during that time was something called memento mori. It's a ancient Christian practice of meditating on your death. I had wanted to do that for a long time, but I was inspired to do it right before I found out about Father Dave, actually. I think that was God giving me something that would help me through a really difficult time. So I had this ceramic skull and I put it on my desk, and every day I would think about my death, my inevitable death, and how I would want to live that day in light of that. So I would share about my practice of memento mori online. And it was a really surreal experience because I was in one of the darkest places of my life, and at the same time, it just became really popular online. People were really paying attention, and it was mostly on Twitter or X that I was sharing about it. So people were asking me to do interviews and videos and all kinds of things, and I was not in a place to do that. I felt like I was hanging on for my life. But memento mori helped me. It kept me sane. It kept me focused on what was most important. And eventually, the New York Times did an interview of me that ended up on the front cover of the New York Times. That practice put things in perspective. It kept me from making rash decisions out of my pain. I think it's possible I would have left the convent without it, or even the church. I had loved the church so much that I get emotional just thinking about how much I love the church. So it was really hard after to balance the reality that something I loved was now something that felt dangerous, something that had failed me. And I really felt like the church had failed me. Even though I knew intellectually it was people in the church who had failed me, it felt bigger than that and deeper than that. It was difficult for me to pray sometimes, and memento mori really helped me in that time. It gave me the courage to continue to speak out about what was happening. So after we submitted the second case, I made clear to my superiors that if this second decision comes back and it doesn't protect people, I feel that I want to speak out about this. And I remember the sisters I told whenever I would say this, they would look absolutely shocked. And they would say, well, the other sister would never come forward publicly, as if that kind of settled it. I couldn't come forward if she didn't come forward. I felt like they were saying, you won't be believed without her story. And I knew on some level that that was probably true, but I was ready to come forward without her story.
Tertullian, an early Christian writer, compared the church to a ship carrying souls through life storms toward eternity. But what happens when those meant to steady the vessel shift their burden onto the most vulnerable? In physics, displacement refers to the water a ship pushes aside to stay afloat. The heavier the ship, the more water it displaces. For Sister Theresa and me, it felt like we are cast overboard, pushed outward by dark, overwhelming waves, drowned by a weight that was never ours to bear. Abuse shatters safety and control, and for survivors, when others turn away or fail to act, there's often a second wound: isolation and betrayal. Survivors see danger more clearly than anyone else because they have lived it firsthand. But when communities avoid confronting the conditions that allowed abuse to occur, survivors are often left to carry the burden alone, the unbearable weight of knowing what others don't, and the helplessness of watching them walk blindly into harm. That's why Sister Theresa and I felt compelled to speak out, not just to share our stories, but to ask, why does this heavy burden so often fall on survivors? Why don't those with actual responsibility bear it themselves? In our last episode, we began to broaden our scope. We're moving into the reality that real prevention goes beyond just holding individual perpetrators accountable. It requires communities to ask tough questions like, What could we have done differently? What allowed this to happen? Without that reflection, the burden shifts back to the survivor. Whether in a school, family, or corporation, any environment unwilling to face the roots of abuse often prioritizes a clean image at a devastating cost. Someone always pays. When a community refuses to confront its own darkness, it will inevitably cast the darkness onto others. In this episode, we walk with Sister Theresa Aletheia through the 5th stage of grief, depression, and loneliness. It's here that the weight of everything truly hits her. The truth of what happened, the abuse, the silence, the betrayal, rises to the surface. She begins to ask herself some really difficult questions. Is justice possible for me? Will my community ever face the depth of what has happened? At the same time, she's preparing for one of the most sacred moments of her life, final vows. She travels to Italy to make that commitment, carrying both her grief and her hope. While there, she turns to her community's leadership with questions she's carried for years. Seeking just simple, honest answers, she receives rejection instead. And from that moment forward, nothing unfolds the way she imagined. This is Descent into Light. Welcome to Episode 5, The Displaced Weight of Abuse.
When I first joined the convent, it seemed like keeping the peace was one of the highest values in our community, no matter the cost. So at the time, I didn't question this value. I was new. I just assumed that everything that I was being taught about holiness must be right. I mean, the sisters had been living this life for longer than I had, so I did what most people do in a new foreign environment. I just tried to fit in. So I'm naturally pretty direct and blunt, but I tried to temper that a lot and be more docile and diplomatic and sweet. I thought, this is the mold that is being presented to me, so I need to fit it so I'll grow holier. I never really felt like I fit into that mold or like I ever would, really. But I think I just thought, well, it's because I have a lot to work on. And I knew that that's true. I was pretty aware of my failings and things that I needed to improve. But what it took a long time for me to realize, it took years really in the convent to realize that no one really fit into the mold. Some people did better than others, but they were really contorting themselves to fit into it. After what happened with Father Dave, everything shifted. I just stopped trying to be sweet and docile because I saw how dangerous that could be. And I would just ask God for clarity and how to move forward. And whenever I would pray about what I should do, I would hear him say, use your voice. As I reflected, I could see the ways that Father Dave had been able to operate in our community. And there were patterns that I had noticed to some degree before, but now I couldn't unsee them. One of the biggest patterns was that questions and concerns were often not received well.
Sister Theresa Aletheia's experience wasn't just the result of trauma. It was also shaped by how our community responded to that trauma. Rather than reflect on how the abuse was allowed to happen, it felt like we put the blame fully on Father Dave, closed the chapter, and moved on. Too often, when abuse occurs, questions are avoided. Why? Fear. Fear of the implications, of losing reputation, of disrupting peace. But silence doesn't stop abuse. It makes it more likely. In this episode, we look at why some communities discourage questions and why people who speak the truth and point to a problem often become the problem. We explore this dynamic through a powerful lens, the scapegoat mechanism, a concept developed by philosopher René Girard. To help us unpack this fascinating pattern, We spoke with Professor Luke Burgess, author of Wanting and professor at the Catholic University of America.
My name is Luke Burgess, and I'm a professor at the Catholic University of America in D.C. I teach in the business school. Girard was an interdisciplinary thinker in a way that not many public intellectuals today are. He was interested in religion. He read philosophy. He was a historian by training. So a deeply interdisciplinary thinker who began to make connections to ancient philosophy, began to, through reading classic literature, namely French literature, saw this phenomenon at the heart of human desire that he didn't think had ever been fully articulated before. And that was that the nature of human desire is fundamentally imitative or mimetic. Mimetic desire can be seen, for instance, when you turn a bunch of toddlers loose in a room full of toys. Something happens there, even if there's plenty of toys for everybody, wonderful toys. Some strange thing happens where one of the toddlers will pick up a single shiny red toy, some cool toy, for whatever reason. It might have just been chance, where they were attracted to it. The other toddlers will often take notice of that object, not for any intrinsic value that it has, not because they really wanted it, but because of the intense desire that the first showed in it. In a sense, the more that the first kid wants to play with the toy, the more that they want to play with the toy. Pretty soon, 3 of them are fighting over the same toy. And before you know it, there's some magical power associated with that single toy. The desires are mediated by the people and not by the object. And this, of course, happens with adults. I use the example of toddlers because the toddlers are a little less ashamed of this behavior.
Mimetic desire, the tendency to mirror the desires of those around us and to compete with one another, is part of every human gathering. But in certain environments, it gains more traction, for better or for worse. Convent life is one of those environments. It's hard to describe convent culture to someone who hasn't lived it, but if you've ever been part of a tightly controlled setting, one marked by sameness, shared ideals, and a clear structure, you'll recognize the patterns. In our community, we wore the same habit, followed the same daily schedule, and aimed for the same vision of holiness. Imitation was everywhere. It was part of the air we breathed. Sometimes it was harmless, or even endearing, like the time one sister bought a Himalayan salt lamp, sang its praises, and within weeks, salt lamps glowed from nearly every room in the house. Other times, mimetic desire could actually be helpful. A new sister's fervor and enthusiasm can bring renewed energy and deeper resolve to older sisters. Likewise, younger sisters might imitate the good desires of older sisters, such as the desire to love others well. This kind of imitation is a beautiful part of community life. But not all imitation is innocent. Beneath the surface, rivalry can grow. Desires collide, competition emerges, and those who ask hard questions or simply don't fit in the mold can find themselves subtly sidelined. That might sound surprising. Aren't religious communities supposed to transcend these petty human dynamics? The truth is, they don't. Even in convents, monasteries, and seminaries, perhaps especially there, these dynamics flourish. Because mimetic desire isn't a religious problem, it's a human one. In its best form, it's the very reason we choose to form religious communities, to shape our desires toward what is holy together. In some ways, religious communities are a recognition of the power of what is called positive mimesis, or the imitation of others' positive desires. But when those desires become rivalrous or conflict with one another, they can turn toxic. This happens especially when someone breaks from the pattern and raises a concern or names the thing no one wants to name. Often when this happens, these people are seen as a threat, a disruption, a problem to be handled. And that's the real tragedy. Not just that these patterns exist, but that all too often they go unchallenged, even in places where the gospel should call us to do better.
Mimetic rivalry tends to escalate and escalate, and escalate until it results in a full-blown crisis. It gets resolved through what Girard calls the scapegoat mechanism. Now, what is that process? The process starts through mimesis. It starts through an imitative behavior where one person can point the finger at someone or group of people that oftentimes are marginalized or don't have a lot of power or are deviant in some way, or that are the first ones that dare risk speaking the truth or saying something that breaks whatever social cohesion the group had, oftentimes based on a lie or on some unspoken thing that nobody is willing to talk about. So you could think of it as a false peace that the group had. As soon as somebody deviates and breaks that kind of omerta that was in the group, oftentimes somebody signals them or points them out as the one causing the problem. They're a convenient scapegoat, a convenient person or group on which to transfer the blame so as not to have to actually do the hard work of dealing with it themselves. So through this process of mimesis and mimetic accusation, the blame is shifted from all of the people inside of the group and transferred and shifted onto what Girard calls a scapegoat. And it picks up steam as more and more people begin to signal them out. Their own guilt is then transferred onto that person or onto that group, and they are expelled from the community, and often in very powerful or violent ways. Of course, it's only temporary until the mimetic rivalry and conflict begins to happen again, and it will, unless there is some true, genuine process through which that sinfulness, through which the disordered desires are resolved. And there's a Christian answer to that, which involves repentance and conversion and honesty and faith and charity. But there's a human solution to that problem that does not need God. And Girard noticed that throughout human history, the pattern is that humans resolve this kind of crisis through the scapegoat mechanism. And that was his really powerful insight.
Before I left for Italy, dozens of sisters would pull me aside and tell me, just get through Italy, keep your head down and get through Italy. One sister repeated the mantra that, I'd heard since I entered, which was, lay low and live long. In other words, just stay under the radar and you will be okay. I heard those pieces of advice. I don't think I really understood the gravity of them, but I could see their worry for me, and it made me a little worried. I really feel like at the point that I left for Italy, though, I had moved through my depression and loneliness, and memento mori had really helped me to come to a place of strength that was really rooted in my relationship with God. So I was entering into this phase with a lot of strength. The Lord just kept saying to me in my prayer, I accept you, I love you, be who you are.
Scapegoating isn't just a convent problem, it's a human problem. Statistically, the most common setting for abuse is not the church, or the school, or the convent, or the seminary. It's the home. And the same dynamics play out in families. One study of child sexual abuse found that in many cases, the abuse wasn't hidden at all. Other family members were aware but said nothing. In these cases, silence and denial becomes the cover, and the child is left to carry the shame alone. After all, if the guilt were shared, someone would have to act. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that, quote, the Church is nothing other than the family of God, end quote. And that's a real spiritual reality. Through baptism, we believe that we become brothers and sisters in Christ. But just as in the human family, which is meant to model the love of the Trinity, abuse can still happen. We can bring to the church the same behaviors that play out in the family unit. We might be silent around abuse. We might blame the victims rather than address it because that's far easier than demanding accountability. We might feel we must be loyal to our spiritual family, and for many of us, loyalty means that we avoid bringing to light any dysfunction and scandal. So we keep silent. And in that silence, survivors suffer. Not only are they wounded by the original harm, they're left to carry it alone. How does this relate to mimetic desire and scapegoating? In many organizations and communities, what matters most becomes the survival of the institution, its reputation, money, and status. We must protect our image becomes a shared and imitated desire within these organizations. The desire to protect an institution's reputation creates a culture of silence, within which anyone who dares speak up is met with suspicion. As we imitate this desire in others to protect the institution, pretty soon all the people in the organization are willing to scapegoat anyone who raises issues that threaten that very vital desire. This dynamic happens among human communities, but it is not inevitable. In a healthy family, when someone is harmed or raises the alarm, everyone rallies. Healthy families confront painful truths together. The survivor is supported, the perpetrator is stopped. And the weight of the pain is shared, not dumped on the shoulders of the one who has already suffered most and truly had nothing to gain from coming forward except to stop the abuse. That's the kind of church we're called to be. Not a perfect church, but a faithful one. A church that bears each other's burdens. A church where we stop asking, how do we protect our image, and start asking, how do we protect people? A church where the scapegoating pattern is disrupted.
The first time that something happens to you, it's not a pattern to you. There may be a structural pattern, but to you, it's not a pattern because it's the first time that you're seeing it. So you begin to question your own experience in all of these ways. And told, oh, it's not a big deal, or why would you want to cause everybody else all of this stress? In Italian, there's the phrase, the bella figura. Everybody wants to maintain the external bella figura. We don't want people to see the messiness of our lives, of the institution that we're a part of. And we'll maintain the bella figura, the beautiful figure, external figure, at all costs. And I'm convinced that the cost that we ultimately pay is far, far worse. We have to be able to look at our sinfulness and at the sinfulness of the families, the institutions that we're a part of, and see it for what it is. It's the first step to being able to heal, and we believe in a redemptive God that can heal that. And we have to be able to look at it and acknowledge it and accept it first. I think there is a cycle of silence that can be mimetically reinforced. I think that the desire for self-preservation is strong in all of us. We don't want to put ourselves at risk of becoming a scapegoat, but I don't think there's any way to eliminate the possibility of being scapegoated. I don't think that there is some way to totally shield yourself from the possibility that might happen. And in fact, dying to oneself is a fundamental part of the Christian life. So I think a readiness and a willingness to sacrifice for the truth is, we need more models like that.
When I was in Italy getting ready for my final vows, a sister came to give us a class about our community's mission. She was considered an expert on this, so I was really interested to learn from her. During her talk, she told us, really sincerely, I thought, that she wanted to hear from us. She said to write to her from our hearts, that if we had any questions or concerns, she would she would love to hear them. She said she wanted to know what we thought and what we were experiencing about the mission and community. And I had had some pretty fundamental questions about the mission. I had been told why the community was founded, and I had read the founder, and I really loved the mission, but it felt like there was a disconnect between what the community was doing and what the founder had started the community for. And I'd always felt this. I had felt it the moment I entered. But I had remained for 12 years with that question because I believed in the mission and I was invested. And I was really devoted to the founder. But I was about to dedicate my entire life to this community, and I just wanted to know, am I seeing things right? Like, I see this disconnect, but is it real? Is there something you could do to help me understand it as I dedicate my life to this? Am I missing something? All I really needed was someone to say, what you're seeing is real, or what you're seeing is not quite correct, but this might help you understand it. And then I was ready to stay. That was all I was asking for. I wasn't angry or looking for a fight, but I was asking because I really cared. I wanted to understand. I wanted to feel like what we were doing as a community matched what we said we were about. So when the sister invited us to write to her, I did. I wrote her a really honest, heartfelt, passionate letter. I trusted her words, and I believed that she really wanted to know what was on my mind. But pretty quickly after sending that letter, I realized maybe I had crossed an invisible line that I didn't even realize was there.
All right, stay with us. Since episode 4, we've been gradually zooming out to explore the broader context in which sexual abuse happens. And the more we zoom out, the more complex and nuanced the picture becomes. That makes sense, because abuse often doesn't begin with something obvious. If it did, preventing it would be a lot simpler. Instead, abuse often takes root in hidden, hard-to-identify ways. It rarely starts with just one person's bad behavior. It's shaped and either prevented or enabled by the environment around it. Why does that context matter so much? If you remember, in the last episode, Father Samuel Fernandez helped us see that in the Catholic Church, sexual abuse is almost always preceded by more subtle forms of spiritual abuse. So what do these early warning signs look like? What are the red flags that an environment is spiritually unsafe? They're often found in places where spiritual abuse can happen without oversight, communities where members are discouraged from speaking up, or where there's no way to seek outside help. This can happen in convents and monasteries, but also in any church setting lacking a transparent, accountable structure, one where concerns are ignored or suppressed. We have already explored what this can look like in abuse of conscience because that form of abuse is most closely connected with sexual abuse. Often a person who has been groomed to enter into a sexual relationship with someone who has a spiritual power over them is convinced over time that he or she is doing the will of God. In other words, the abuser has entered into this person's conscience and can control it on some level to believe that something bad is actually good. But a form of abuse that precedes or accompanies abuse of conscience is abuse of power. To dig deeper, we spoke with Paul Fahey, a mental health counselor who specializes in spiritual abuse.
I'm Paul Fahey. I'm a professional counselor, retreat leader, and the host of the Third Space podcast. I provide counseling for those who've been spiritually abused and create resources for church leaders to better safeguard their communities against abuse. I live in Michigan with my wife, Christina, and our 5 kids. So one rule of thumb that I've come up with in my work with clients for helping to identify spiritual abuse is, was spiritual authority used to teach, encourage, or invite? Or was someone's spiritual authority used to get others to believe a certain way, feel a certain way, or behave a certain way? If it's the latter, now we're moving into the realm of coercion. Abuse of power is the misuse of power or authority over another to coerce or manipulate them. What comes to mind when I think of abuse of power is the line from Spider-Man, "With great power comes great responsibility." It is the responsibility of those who have power in a situation, in a relationship, in a dynamic, to first recognize that they have power to begin with, to always do what they can to avoid harm, even unintentional harm, of those they are caring for, and to use that power solely for the good of others, respecting their conscience, their freedom, and their dignity. This is the responsibility of those who are in a position of power. This is a standard for helping professions. So as a professional counselor, this is in my code of ethics that I'm responsible to recognize, no matter how egalitarian I try and make my sessions, my work with clients, there is always a power differential. And I'm the one who's responsible to make sure that I'm not even unintentionally harming the person I'm working with. Good intentions are not sufficient. And that's an important aspect of abuse of power, is that good intentions are not enough.
After I sent my letter, I was invited to meet with a sister in leadership. And I went to that meeting with a lot of hope. I was hoping to learn and to receive some clarity and encouragement as I made this really big step. And I was hoping for maybe a better understanding of the bigger picture. Maybe there was something I was missing. But it didn't really go that way. Instead of talking about the larger question that I had raised, the focus shifted to me, to my own personal experience and what I would be doing in the mission. And I told the sister that wasn't my concern at all. My concern isn't what I'm doing. It was about the overall direction. I was asking to understand, to help to understand that. And because the conversation wasn't happening in my first language, it was Italian, I just eventually ran out of words. And I also was feeling pretty discouraged because it felt like the immediate pattern of the conversation was something that often seemed to happen, in my opinion, which was I raised a problem, but then it was focused on me. So by the end, it felt like we were talking past each other. So I just let it go. But later I met with another sister in leadership, and that conversation really didn't go well. She had read the letter that I had written, but instead of asking me about it and trying to understand where I was coming from, she seemed to assume that writing it meant I was unhappy or even thinking about leaving. That couldn't have been further from the truth. I was just months away from my final vows. I loved my community. I had a deep devotion to our founder, to our mission. I had prepared to make this step for 12 years. And now I was going to make my final vows. I was taking it very seriously. In fact, the ceremony for my vows had already been scheduled. So I was not asking to leave. I wasn't even expressing doubts. I was just asking a question. I was hoping for some kind of dialogue and guidance as I made this huge decision. But in the meeting, it was hard to explain all that. I didn't know this sister very well, so there wasn't much of a foundation for my conversation with her. And at one point, she said she didn't even know that I had these concerns. And that was confusing to me because I had been very vocal about these concerns. So in the conversation, she seemed pretty upset, and I just asked her, do you need some time? Or I wasn't sure what was really happening. But she said, yes, I do. I'll get back to you. And that week of waiting was one of the most difficult weeks of my entire life.
Abuse of power can easily happen within religious life because of the spiritual authority that superiors, spiritual directors, and even the cultures and norms of the community have over individual members. This kind of abuse can be used to break down an individual's psyche to get them to comply with the norms of the superior or community, right? So there's this breaking down, this is getting someone to not trust their own intuition, their own desires, their own sense of what's good and what's true, but rather going along with what the authority tells them to do because of the trust that they have in the authority, and the way that the authority has consolidated, and the way that that authority claims to speak on behalf of God into this person's life. Like, the goal is to get individual sisters in the community to believe certain things, feel a certain way, or behave a certain way, rather than teaching, encouraging, and inviting.
Sister Theresa was just 2 months away from making her final vows. She was in a foreign country, thousands of miles away, when over Zoom, she was told that everything she had been preparing for over the past 12 years was suddenly on hold, reconsidered, suspended. When she told me what had happened to her, I didn't respond with reassurance. I didn't say it'll all work out. My first thought was much more sobering. If this can happen to her, and other sisters have told me that this has happened before to other sisters, then why wouldn't it happen to me?
I was really anxious for that entire week when I was waiting for an answer. And I remember thinking, all of this because I sent an email. When we finally met again, there wasn't much dialogue. It was just a request for another week before a decision could be made. And by then, my anxiety was really through the roof. And I remember saying how hard it was for me to carry that for another week when I didn't even really understand what was happening. But the response I got was that I just had to wait. I was struggling to make sense of what was happening. It felt really unclear. And during that second week, things felt even heavier for me. I spent so much time in the chapel, as much time as I could, just praying through my confusion and my distress. And at a certain point, I had this sense of God stepping in. I felt like he wasn't happy with how I was being treated. And he reminded me, I am the one who is in control of your life. I hold the keys to your future. I am your future. I felt like he was asking me to open my decision-making further than I had really thought I needed to open it. For years, he had told me to stay in this community. And every single year, I had brought it back to him in prayer, and he had told me that that was what he wanted, and I had continued. But in this moment, I felt like he might want something else of me, given the circumstances.
Many of you listening have probably experienced something like this before, or you've seen it happen to someone else. Maybe not in a convent, but in a workplace, a family, a church, a covenant community, a book club, a school board, or anywhere where human beings gather. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The scapegoat mechanism. You point out the cracks in the structure, and suddenly, you're the crack, the threat, the one to be managed. It happens when preserving the image of a group becomes more important than caring for the people inside it, when survival of the system outweighs truth, accountability, and love. If the desires of a community center around self-preservation, efficiency, control, or any number of values contrary to the gospel, then scapegoating becomes almost inevitable. Inconvenient members must be ejected from communities where spiritual abuse is common because they challenge what is happening. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to happen this way. Communities can change, patterns can break, but only if we dare to name what's really happening and choose another way. Luke Burgess explains more.
I believe the single most important thing that a leader can do is to recover and model a deep sense of Christian personalism in the way that he or she is interacting and encountering other people. Human dignity, personal encounter, and not the institutional self-preservation at all costs. Recovering the sense of personalism, who is in my life, who is close to me, how do I help them know that it's okay to talk to me, that they can trust me, that I'm not going to use what they say against them, is critical. People know when people are encountering other people as persons, one-on-one, and truly listening. The stories have to be told, but the stories are not going to be told unless there is first a movement which makes people feel like they can tell their stories. I think we need more leaders in the church that take the first step towards creating the kind of environment where people feel like they are safe, that they're going to receive true pastoral care, that they're going to be believed, their experience will be believed, that it will never be used against them, spoken about in public in flippant ways. I think that there's a positive mimetic process that happens when a leader, and specifically a church leader, takes the first step in creating that place of encounter. It encourages others to meet them there, and that is a form of positive mimesis. So we need the kind of leaders that practice that Christian personalism where they're taking somebody seriously and not allowing narratives to get in the way of the person who is in front of them.
Once other sisters found out that I was in this place of uncertainty, it just felt like a dam broke, and all of these sisters reached out to me and shared other stories of similar situations that they had seen in the past. Some encouraged me to just follow the process and be quiet so that things could go smoothly. While others said, "Oh God, it's happening again." Eventually, after another really anxious week, I was told that after my time in Italy, I would need to return for a new period of discernment. And the decision about my final vows would be made on a month-to-month basis. And I was told it probably would be less than a year, and maybe even much less, but I needed to cancel my ceremony. Preparing for final vows is like preparing for a wedding. It's a huge moment. And really, it's the biggest moment in a sister's life. So I received this news just 2 months before my final vows were scheduled. My bishop had agreed to celebrate the Mass. My family had started to make arrangements for food. Friends had booked unrefundable travel. Everything was set for this huge event. And now, because I had written an email seeking clarity on a concern that I had expressed for years, I was told that there had to be a new period of discernment. I really didn't understand why, and when I asked, I wasn't given a clear explanation. So at one point, it was mentioned that I didn't appear to have the peace of Christ. And the thing is, from my perspective, I had been pretty peaceful up until all of these unexpected changes left me in such uncertainty.
Our communities are meant to be places where people flourish. As St. Irenaeus once wrote, "The glory of God is a human being fully alive." But people cannot thrive where real concerns are dismissed or ignored, and people are scapegoated when they raise problems. At the heart of every vocation is a mystery. God speaks a unique word into each soul, a word that cannot be repeated, replicated, or erased. And when a person gives their life to follow that word, to offer themselves completely in love and trust, that gift must be reverenced. When that happens, God doesn't turn away, He acts. As St. Paul reminds us, if we are unfaithful, He remains faithful, for He cannot deny Himself. God never abandons us in the dark. He exposes what's hidden, He lights the way forward. So if you find your story or your organization or community reflected in any of these unhealthy patterns, don't be afraid. It doesn't mean all is lost. It means you're being invited to trust that God is who He says He is, and that His truth heals. Because what's more powerful than a quote-unquote perfect community is one that tells the truth with courage, one that dares to speak what's been silenced, one that apologizes when it makes mistakes, and one that addresses dysfunction when someone says, "That really hurt me."
So after that decision was made, I was told that I should remain in Italy and continue my preparation for final vows. But I felt like what was happening to me was wrong. I didn't believe that anyone should be treated this way for expressing honest concerns. But I also knew that a lot of people would just tell me to continue, and a lot of people were. They were just saying, continue, be quiet and continue. And I was willing to do that if God wanted me to. But I also told God that I thought that what had happened wasn't right. And it's one thing to accept that it happened to me, but what if it happened to someone after me? I wanted to make my vows. I wanted to give my life entirely to God. But at this point, maintaining my integrity and following my conscience was more important than keeping my plans, even the most important plans. So I just waited and I prayed, and in the meantime, I kept using my voice. I told the sisters that what I had experienced, I felt was spiritual abuse. And the really sad thing is that I know that these sisters did not mean to hurt me or harm me in any way. I know that that was not their intention. They were just used to the same patterns that they were inflicting on me. They had lived them, they had suffered them, and I think what was sad to me is that it seemed like people saw these things as an inevitable part of religious life. And I just don't think that's true. I don't think these patterns and behaviors are a necessary part of religious life. I think there are other ways that we can choose to live.
While Sister Theresa Aletheia prayed and discerned about what God was asking her to do next, I was making my own discernment. I was asking myself, am I called to live with these patterns and behaviors that my community seems unwilling to address? I wondered, who will I become in the long run if I remain? Most importantly, what was God revealing to Sister Theresa Aletheia and me through our experiences? So we both turned to God in prayer and serious discernment, and He made clear what we should do next. This audio documentary is the first step in the mission of the Sisters of the Little Way of Beauty, Truth, and Goodness, a mission of listening and solidarity with people on the fringes of the Church, especially those who have been wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the Church. If you would like to support our mission and projects like this, please visit sistersofthelittleWay.com.
The shame of innocence forsaken marks this human epidermis as the lacerations show what grows beneath the surface. A leprosy concealed, what person could deserve this suffering body? This is my body.